Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we don't just read the rulebook, we try to figure out what it actually means for your business. Today, we're jumping into what is probably the most critical topic for anyone in the European crypto space right now. The markets and crypto assets regulation. MiCA.
Right. And it's been the tectonic plate shift we've all been talking about for years.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting is the disconnect we're seeing in the community. Everyone keeps talking about MiCA v1 and MiCA v2.
Yeah, which is confusing because legally speaking, there's only one regulation, right? Just one text.
Exactly. But in practice, it feels like different versions because of how it's being rolled out. So that's really the core of the confusion.
Okay, so let's start right there. What is the actual practical difference between this V1 people think is already here and the V2 that's on the horizon?
Well, the basic text that came into force back in 2023, that's what people are calling V1. Yeah. It was largely a placeholder. It set out the big principles, that crypto asset service providers, CSPs, will need a license, that stablecoins have to be regulated. It was the blueprint, not the detailed instructions.
And V2 is where the rubber meets the road?
Precisely. MiCA v2 isn't a new law. It's the moment all the detailed mandatory technical standards, we're talking hundreds of pages of rules, are actually being applied. You combine those with national laws like the Czech Digital Finance Act, and suddenly theory turns into very, very real compliance obligations. It's an implementation nightmare, not a legislative update.
So our mission today is to cut through that noise. We're going to give you a clear map of the timeline from 2023 to 2026 and really focus on the obligations you just can't avoid. And if you're running a crypto business in the Czech Republic, we're going to get very specific about the deadlines you absolutely cannot miss.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's unpack that timeline first, because the gradual rollout is what's creating this whole version illusion. Walk us through the official EU phases.
Sure. So the very first step was phase 1 way back on June 29, 2023. That was just the legal text entering into force.
So not much happened then?
No, the impact was minimal. It was like the opening ceremony before the marathon actually begins. It let everyone get ready.
Then came the first real test, which hit a huge part of the market.
That was phase 1.5 on June 30, 2024. This was a massive deal for stablecoins, your asset reference tokens, and e-money tokens. All of a sudden, issuers had to deal with intense obligations. Mandatory reserve audits, strict capital requirements, detailed white papers. This is the first sign that MiCA had, real teeth.
And now we're heading for the big one, the moment everyone is calling MiCA v2.
That's phase 2, which kicks in on December 30, 2024. You can think of this date as the main activation switch for the entire CASP regime.
So from that day, if you run an exchange or a custody service,
the requirement to be licensed officially begins. The whole suite of compliance asset segregation, governance rules, reporting, it all becomes mandatory. And for businesses already operating, this starts the clock on a very stressful race.
The grandfathering race.
Exactly.
And what's the final deadline? The point of no return.
That's phase 4 on July 1st, 2026. This is the hard stop. By this date, if you're offering any crypto services in the EU, you must have a full, approved CASP license. No excuses, no extensions.
If you don't,
you shut down. Period.
Okay, that December 30, 2024 date is clearly the starting gun. But let's dig into why it's the full application moment. You mentioned these level 2 and level 3 measures. This is where all the pain is, right?
It absolutely is. I mean, think of the original MiCA text, the level 1 laws, as the basic zoning rule. Just as you must build a safe house.
Right.
The level 2 and level 3 standards are the hundreds of pages of building codes that follow. They define the exact materials you have to use, the specific plumbing requirements, where every single safety feature needs to go.
And these are coming from the big European authorities?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Primarily ESMA and the EBA. And there are two types you really need to know. First, RTS, or regulatory technical standards. The RTS defines the specific requirements. It's the what. So it'll detail the minimum qualifications your management needs. You can't just have your tech genius also be your risk manager anymore. It sets out granular rules for segregating client assets, the exact cybersecurity protocols you must follow. It's incredibly detailed.
So RTS is what your house needs. What's IDIS?
IDIS, or Implementation Technical Standards. This is the how. It's the operational layer. So the regulator says we need a monthly report.
And the IDIS says?
The IDIS says that report has to be in this specific XML format using this exact template. And if you get a single data field wrong, our system will reject it. It's the tedious but critical communication standard.
That level of detail is exactly why people feel like it's a new version. They read the blueprint, V1, and now they're drowning in the fine print, V2.
That's the perfect way to put it. The level 1 text was maybe 150 pages.
Right.
The RTS and ICAS documents are hundreds and hundreds of pages of technical prescriptive rules. It's that sheer volume and depth that is the real regulatory upgrade.
And what about level 3?
Level 3 is basically the practical stuff. Guidelines, statements, Q&As. When a rule in MiCA is a bit vague, the regulators will issue a guideline to clarify. For businesses in transition, this is the really actionable advice.
Got it. So let's bring this down to the local level. How is the Czech Republic handling all of this? I hear they're moving pretty fast.
They've been very proactive. The key piece of legislation you need to know is the Digital Finance Act, or ZDF. And critically, this law comes into effect early, on February 15, 2025.
So even before the main EU licensing regime fully kicks in, what's the biggest change the ZDF brings?
The biggest change is that the old easy system is dead. For years, small crypto providers in the Czech Republic could operate under a simple crypto trader trade license. It was cheap, it was easy.
And now?
The ZDF completely eliminates that. The Czech National Bank, the CNB, is now the one and only authority that can issue a CSP license.
Wow. So if you're a small exchange, you suddenly have to meet the standards of a financial institution overseen by the central bank.
It's a total institutional overhaul, and that's what makes the grandfathering mechanism so important. It's the bridge for existing businesses.
How does that work?
It lets any VASP or CASP that was operating before December 30th, 2024 to keep providing services while their new CASP license application is being processed by the CNB.
So it's a safety net.
It is, but it only lasts until July 1st, 2026, and it depends on you meeting one absolutely critical, non-negotiable deadline.
Okay, this is the part where everyone should probably grab a pen.
Absolutely. The single most important date to circle on your calendar is July 31st, 2025. All CASP applications must be submitted to the CNB by that date. If you miss it by even one day, your grandfathering protection is gone, instantly.
And that means?
That means the CNB can order you to stop all activities immediately. It doesn't matter if you plan to comply later. You miss the date, you're out.
That seems incredibly strict. I mean, what if you miss it because of a bureaucratic delay or because some of the EU rules are still being finalized?
That's the challenge. The regulators have made it clear that the onus is entirely on the provider to be ready. Missing the deadline because your audit was slow or your legal team was overwhelmed, that's just not going to be an acceptable excuse.
So the July 2025 deadline is really a test of your intent and your readiness to operate like a real financial institution.
Exactly. And it's important to remember, grandfathering just keeps you operating locally in the Czech Republic. It doesn't give you the EU passport.
Ah, so you can't expand into Germany or France with that status.
Correct. For that, you need the final approved CASP license. Grandfathering is damage control, not an opportunity to grow.
Okay, so since this license is mandatory for almost everyone, custodians, exchanges, even advisors, let's get into the nitty-gritty. What does full compliance, this MiCA V2, actually demand from a business starting in 2025?
It's a complete overhaul. You're moving from a tech startup mindset to a regulated financial institution mindset. Let's break it down into, say, 6 key pillars.
Okay, pillar 1.
First, licensing and capital. The barrier to entry just skyrockets. You'll need independent audits and proof your management team is actually qualified to run a regulated company. And then there's the capital. Depending on your services, you'll need between 50,000 and 500,000 euros in mandatory reserve capital. Just sitting there.
That alone will wipe out a lot of smaller players.
Okay, what about the people running the show?
That's pillar 2, governance and risk management. This is a huge shift. MiCA requires you to have specific, defined roles. A chief information security officer, a compliance officer, a dedicated risk manager.
So no more founder wearing all the hats.
Not a chance. You need specialized, certified, and frankly, expensive people. And the personal liability for those roles goes way up.
Okay, pillar 3 has to be AML/KYC.
Right. And the rules here are getting much, much tighter. We're talking about advanced transaction monitoring systems. It's not just about getting a copy of a passport anymore. It's about constant due diligence, checking for politically exposed persons, and being proactive about filing suspicious activity reports. And what about protecting the customer's money? I mean, after all the platform failures we've seen, that has to be a big one.
It's pillar 4, and it's non-negotiable. Asset segregation. MiCA demands a strict, verifiable separation between the company's assets and client assets.
Like a client trust account, but for crypto.
Pretty much. And on top of that, you have to get third-party insurance to cover client assets in custody and you have to pass an annual mandatory segregation audit from an external firm.
Wait, an annual segregation audit? How does that even work for, say, a non-custodial service? That sounds incredibly complex.
It is, and that's what the Level 2 standards are trying to define right now. For custodians, they'll audit your wallet infrastructure, your key management. For hybrid services, the audit forces you to prove technically that you cannot touch client funds without their explicit traceable instruction. You have to prove you're not a counterparty to your client's risk.
Okay, that's 4. What are the last 2?
Pillar 5 is IT security. You need industrial-grade cybersecurity, which often means getting a formal certification like ISO 27001. You need to do regular pen testing, have a robust disaster recovery plan,
And the 6th.
reporting, and transparency. Everything from public disclosures about your services to standardized monthly or quarterly reports filed with the CNB. Plus, if you have a major security breach, you have to report it to them within 24 to 72 hours.
Okay, that is a massive checklist. So let's put it into practical terms. For that July 31, 2025 deadline, what are the 2 extreme outcomes for a provider?
The first one is the optimal path. You do everything right. You have the capital, the governance, the audits, and you submit a complete application on time. The result: you get your full CASP license, the EU passport to expand, and instant market credibility.
And the other extreme.
The critical path:
Yeah.
you ignore the complexity, you don't hire the right people, and you fail to submit an application by July 31st, 2025. The result is simple. Your grandfathering protection is gone, and as of July 1st, 2026, you will be shut down. You're legally banned from operating.
We've covered the intense pressure on providers. Let's pivot to the listener, the end user, the investor. What does all this mean for the community?
For the user, it's really a massive upgrade in consumer protection, but it does come at a cost. The biggest win is security. Your assets are just safer because of mandatory segregation and insurance. The risk of a platform collapsing and taking all the client funds with it is dramatically reduced.
And as a user, how do I know who to trust?
That's the other big win: transparency. The CNB will have a public register of all licensed CASPs, so you can immediately see who is a legitimate, regulated operator and who isn't. It creates a very clear line.
But all this trust and regulation comes with a price tag, right? What are the trade-offs we should be ready for?
Yeah, there are definitely trade-offs. First, convenience. Your onboarding process, the whole KYC thing, is going to get stricter. More data, longer verification times.
Okay, so more friction. What else?
A second is cost. All this compliance hiring officers, paying for audits, holding capital. It's expensive. It's almost certain some of those costs will be passed on to users through higher fees.
And finally, I assume some people might get left out.
Correct. Providers will likely restrict services to people from high-risk countries to stay compliant. So for the average user, the trade-off is this. You accept a bit more hassle and maybe slightly higher fees, but in return, you get real asset protection and regulatory oversight. I think the core message here is that MiCA is a dynamic, evolving system. It's not a one-and-done regulation. For any crypto business in the Czech market, becoming a compliant institutional-grade player is now the only path forward.
So it's no longer a question of if you should comply, but how quickly and how thoroughly you can do it. And while that final deadline of July 2026 feels far away, the most immediate, painful hurdle is that July 31, 2025 application deadline. That date is the gatekeeper. But here's the final thought we want to leave you with. The hardest part isn't just filing the application, it's staying compliant after you've filed it. The real MiCA V2 challenge is going to unfold throughout late 2025 and 2026 as ESMA, the EBA, and the CNB keep rolling out more and more of those Level 2 and Level 3 standards. This means that continuous, active monitoring of every new guideline and technical standard is not optional. Your legal audit can't be a one-time thing. It has to be a dynamic, ongoing process because the very definition of compliance in crypto is still being written in real time. Go get your team ready.